You might be familiar with one of the rarest games of all time, Nintendo World Championship. For those who don't know, it was a game that was specifically made for a contest. Because only a handful of copies exist, the game can sometimes go for tens of thousands of dollars. Plenty of NES games are expensive because of their rarity, but some are overpriced for seemingly no reason. Let's take a look at a few examples. What's going on? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. Alright, do me a favor, check out our Discord server, discord.podrez.net. If you're looking for that family type experience, this is for you. Anyway, let's talk about some expensive NES games. In 1990, Nintendo hosted a video game competition where you had a chance to win prizes. The game that the competitors played was called Nintendo World Championship, which contained 3 built-in games. You started off on Super Mario Bros., where you had to collect 50 coins. Then you had to complete the first stage in Rad Racer. And finally, you had to score as many points on Tetris as possible before the time ran out. Players only had 6 minutes and 21 seconds to complete the task, and theoretically you could run out of time before you even made it to Tetris. 2 versions of this game exist. The gray cartridge was given to 90 finalists, while the gold cartridge was given to 60 finalists. Both versions of the game are extremely rare, to the point where some even go for over $100,000. Because very few copies are made, it makes perfect sense why both of these cartridges are so expensive. You may be familiar with some of the other rare NES games. Some titles like Little Samson, Bobble 2, and Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak commonly get mentioned, but sometimes there's not always an explanation for why these games are so expensive. We're going to talk about a few of these games and try to figure out why they're so overpriced. Let's get started. Number 1. Let's take a look at Panic Restaurant. It's a platformer with some cool ideas. You start off with a short range attack, but you can collect weapon upgrades to improve your range. Be careful though, because you lose your weapon as soon as you get hit, even if it's just once. My favorite weapon is the plates because it covers hard to reach areas. At the beginning, you only have 2 hearts, which means you can only take 2 hits, but you can increase your capacity. Every time you destroy an enemy, you can earn coins, which can be used for the slot machine. This is actually very important because you can earn back your life points and gain free lives. The controls are great. Even though your default weapon looks like it has a short range, the hitboxes are actually very lenient. The graphics are extremely well done. The game is obviously food themed, and the developers did a good job embracing that. The music is also phenomenal. The game was released in Japan first, and there were some minor graphical differences. The chef you play as looks different, and there's some small changes to the level layouts. Otherwise, it's nearly identical to the US version. Regardless of what version you play, it's a phenomenal game. If you want to own the game yourself, it's definitely going to cost you. The lowest price I found for this game was $1,000. If you want to get the box and manual with it, you might be paying upwards of $3,000. It's not completely clear why the game is so expensive, but it's most likely because of the late release date, October of 1992. The Super Nintendo was already out at this point, and therefore it wasn't a priority to ship out tons of copies of regular NES games. Number 2. Let's check out Zombie Nation. You play as a samurai head in a basic shooter. There's numerous walls you have to shoot down so you can advance further. You can collect hostages, which will increase the amount of projectiles you're allowed to shoot at once. You can definitely tell it's a later release. The graphics have a lot of color and detail, and there's a lot of animated backgrounds. The screen moves in multiple directions, which is best done with a powerful mapper. The music is excellent. You have a generous life bar, but it's definitely not an easy game. I've never played a shooter where your weapon is so ineffective. The enemies require so much firepower before they die. I'm also disappointed that there's no weapon upgrades, no laser gun or spread gun. You're just stuck with your default weapon. The enemies don't do a ton of damage to your life bar, but the background hazards will. For example, some stages have lightning, which will deal a significant amount of damage. When you're on your last hit point, the game will play this annoying tune. I don't know why the developers felt the need to include this. Like with Panic Restaurant, the game was released in Japan first, and there's some minor differences. In this version, you play as a mask instead of a samurai, and you cannot rapid fire your weapon like you can in the US version. It's an okay game, but there's better shooters out there. This game isn't quite expensive, but still not cheap. The lowest price I could find is over $500, and if you want the boxing manual, you might be paying up to $1,000. Once again, I think the late release date is why this game is so expensive. Number 3. You might be familiar with Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. It was creative on Konami's part to turn this franchise into a fighting game. The Super Nintendo version is the most popular one, but it was released on the Genesis as well. You would think this would be an identical game, but it's actually completely different. Chances are, you might be familiar with at least one of these two games. What you may not be familiar with though is the NES version. I'm honestly shocked this version exists. Can the NES even handle a fighting game? You do have a decent roster of characters, with some that I didn't expect, like Casey Jones and Hothead. Unfortunately, in the story mode, you can only play as the 4 turtles. Speaking of which, the premise is very lame. Basically, Shredder invites all the turtles to the streets of Manhattan so that they can fight. That's it. There's no taking over the world or trying to rescue anyone. To compare, in the Genesis version, a bunch of clone characters capture Splinter, so you must save him. The gameplay is surprisingly playable. For a controller with only 2 buttons, you can perform a decent amount of moves. The turtles all look the same unfortunately, and they don't even have their weapons, but they at least have their own special moves and victory animations. I thought there would be a lot of flickering, but the developers did a good job minimizing it. For example, when a character gets knocked out, their body will be located just under the opponent so that it doesn't trigger any flickering. The developers also prevent you from playing Hothead on both sides. There is a workaround though, so we can see that it does flicker this way. I do have to compliment the graphics. The background has a 3D-like movement, which is impressive for NES standards. Some levels even have parallax scrolling, which is nice. Like I mentioned before, it's disappointing that you can only play as the 4 turtles in story mode. In the Genesis version, you can play as any of the characters in the story mode. Chances are, if you grew up with this game, you're probably most comfortable playing as the turtles because they're the only characters that the game allows you to play. I don't think the NES was meant to handle a Street Fighter style fighting game, so what they accomplished here is very commendable. With that said, it's definitely the worst of the 3 tournament fighter games. You're really not getting that much content. There's only 4 stages total, and in the story mode, I was able to make it to Shredder within 10 minutes. It's an okay game, but nothing special. If you did want to pick up this game, the cheapest one I found was over $250, and if you want the box, you might be paying close to $1,000 for it. Once again, there's not much of an explanation why this game is so expensive, other than the fact that it was released very late in the console's lifespan. Number 4. Let's take a look at Bobble. You play as a dragon who must defeat all the enemies to advance to the next level. You can shoot out bubbles which trap the enemies, but they're actually not defeated until you pop the bubble. If you shoot them at a close range though, they do get defeated immediately. If you take too long on a stage, the game becomes harder and a new enemy will start chasing you throughout the level. The game resembles an early arcade title with it being a single screen. Despite that, there's 100 levels in the game total and each one looks different graphically and layout wise. It might be a simpler game, but sometimes that's all you need. Despite Bobble originating from the arcade, Bobble Part 2 was exclusively an NES and Game Boy game. They definitely went with an if it isn't broken, don't fix it approach. The gameplay is nearly identical, but with some minor changes. The game now has a more detailed background, and some of the platforms move horizontally, which the original game didn't do. Your character can now fly, which you need to do to reach higher platforms. Every 10 stages, you fight a boss, which wasn't a thing in the original game. I'm torn on the graphics. I do think the developers tried to make it more graphically appealing than the first game. When you make it further through the stages, we do see a lot of graphical variation, but I think I prefer the way that the original game looked. I liked that it was a black background because you had to use your imagination. It felt more like a classic arcade game. I see what the developers were trying to do with the new game though. Other games like Snow Brothers were introducing more graphical variation, and Taito wanted to do the same thing with Bobble Part 2. I'm a little torn on this one though, and you might prefer the second game over the first one. I think the developers played it safe with this game. They knew the first game was good, so they didn't change up the gameplay too much in the second iteration. I do think the first game is ever so slightly better though. The price is better too. You can pick up the first game from anywhere from $15 to $20. Part 2 on the other hand starts at $500. I wasn't able to find any information on why this game was so expensive. I hate to default to the same reason every time, but I believe the late release date, August of 1993, is why the game is so expensive. Number 5. Here's the Flintstones, The Rescue of Dino and Hoppy. The premise is that Dino and Hoppy get captured and Fred must rebuild a time machine to get them back. As Fred, your main attack is a club, but you can collect sub-weapons that give you a better range. In order to use the weapons though, you have to collect coins. Kinda reminds me of Castlevania. The main mechanic is that you can grab on the platforms and bring yourself up. My only complaint is the controls. It's hard to get used to Fred's climbing ability, and a few times I accidentally let go. Honestly, every time I climb onto a platform, I tense up. The game is fairly easy, but I had some issues with this particular boss. He charges to each side of the screen, and there's no way to jump over him, so you have to take damage. Overall though, it's a decent game. 2 years later, the same developers came out with Surprise at Dinosaur Peak. The premise is that Pebbles and Bam Bam get trapped near a volcano, and Fred and Barney must save them. Much lamer story in my opinion. Fred's controls are somewhat improved. He's able to climb platforms much quicker than he could in the previous game. You can now play as Barney, who can climb on poles unlike Fred, but he can't grab on the platforms. He has a projectile weapon, which sounds like it would be better, but it's completely ineffective against the enemies. Honestly, I prefer to play as Fred, and I only use Barney when I absolutely need him. I don't understand why Fred can't climb on poles though, he clearly has the upper body strength. The game has a bit more variety than the first one. In one stage, you're riding on a minecart and trying to avoid the enemies. In another stage, you're getting pushed through an underwater area. I do think the developers were more creative with the level design. My only issue is the controls with Barney. It's not easy to climb the poles, and a few times I accidentally fell off. You can stand on top of the pole, but you're unable to walk on them. This could have used some improvement. Otherwise, I do think this is better than the previous game. I can't say the same for the price though. Look at that, $2,000! And if you want the box too, that's over $6,000. To compare, the first game goes for about $30. While it's never been confirmed, it's believed that Surprise at Dinosaur Peak was only available at Blockbuster, which is why not many people own it. If you made it this far in the video, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right there. And have you played any of the games I mentioned in this video, and are there any you would like me to cover next time? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.